Today is lesson 10. So we've got 2 more lessons where I'm instructing and then 2 lessons where you guys are kind of sharing the knowledge. So what we're going to do, I should probably rename this. So we're not doing Angular again. So today will be we are going to start building out a full stack application, and we'll do it over 2 weeks. So there's probably too much for us to be able to cover in a single class. I don't want to rush through it. So instead, today we'll do the setup. We'll see if we can start reading data through the full stack application. And if we have time, we'll also be able to build a form where we can add data. But everything's going to happen. It's going to be an SPA or a single page application. So by the end of next week's class, we want a 1-page application where we can add, edit, view, and delete projects. And that page is going to show real-time data, and it will never need to do a refresh to see our data in real time. So we worked with Angular last week, but that was kind of like a standalone Angular app. It wasn't connected at all to a Node Express, the kind of Node Express projects we've been working with. So we want to sort of put it all together today is the goal. So we're going to create an integrated front-end app that reads its data through Node and Express on the back end. Also, just a note, so if you submitted your quiz by yesterday, so I've marked most of the quizzes, if not all of them. I've also marked assignment 2 part 1 and your lab submissions, unless you submitted them late. Please make sure if you did not email your feedback to your partner, that you do that. I sent an email to both of you, so you would have your partner's email address. So make sure you send your comments to them, because if you only posted them on Blackboard, I've seen them, but your partner won't have gotten your feedback. Okay. Was that useful at all? Actually, I should probably just ask. It's only the second time I've tried that, where I had you provide some feedback on each other's proposals. Did you find that helpful, or was it not really worth the effort? You can let me know in the chat what you thought. Okay, DJ, thanks. Anybody else have an opinion on that little lab exercise? Okay. Got it, Maggie. Okay, it's great. So you like getting feedback? Thanks, So Young. Okay. Thanks, Barack. All right. Well, it's good to hear that people felt it was useful. And there's a few easy marks for you as well. It's actually something I've taken from an idea I've taken from one of my own professors and projects I was working on, that we had to make sure before we submitted, we got feedback from a peer. So Hung, you got no feedback. Okay. Hung, check your email from Maggie. You should have it. So yeah, connect with your partner. If you neglected to send them or you didn't get any feedback from them, then connect by email so you have that. So, and just a reminder that assignment 2 part 2, where you're building, so that's going to be due next week, next Wednesday. That will be due. So we've got this current application that we've built. We built our project tracker, right? And we built it using Mongo, Express, and Node. And doing create, read, update, and delete, the Express generator scaffolds our application. Wasn't very difficult to do once we kind of got down some of the fundamentals of the Node syntax and asynchronous coding and how it works. So right now in our project tracker, we've got 4 models, right? We've got the MongoDB. Maybe I'll just may as well open up WebStorm so we can have a quick look at it. But right now, we really have 4 layers to the application. Yes, same to you. And I'm hoping, I don't know what the weather's like in New York City. The Blue Jays opening pitch should be in about an hour from now. They're in New York playing the Yankees. I don't know if anybody else is a big baseball fan, but I'm a huge baseball and Blue Jays fan. So may have to check the score, see if their game gets going, how the weather is today. So we've got 4 layers in the project. Right? We've got our MongoDB database that we created in the MongoDB Atlas cloud service. We've got models, controllers, and views using EJS. So by now this should look familiar, right? We used Mongoose to create some models where we defined our schema. We created our own controllers that map individual URLs and perform create, read, update, delete operations. And then we had the views. Sorry, I said EJS, I should update that. We're using HBS templating with our handlebars syntax. I should update this. This is not EJS. So that's what we've got so far. So 4 layers, 3 of them inside our node application, and then our database outside. So to get this to run as a full mean stack application, we're going to recreate it as a single page application, and it's going to have a richer user experience. So the idea is everything happens on one page and the page doesn't need to be refreshed. In order to do that, we're going to divide the application up into 2 sides, a server side and a client side. So the server is still going to contain the MongoDB. It's still going to contain our models, so we can actually just copy our models from our existing project tracker. And we're going to have our controllers, but the controllers are going to be different. If we look at the controllers we have right now, our controllers right now are interacting with our UI, right? They call res.render and they load specific views. When we're building a full mean stack application, our controllers basically just become an API. All the methods will do is send and receive JSON, much like the web API that we built in .NET Core last semester. So there aren't going to be any calls to load any specific views or redirect at all in the controller. So we're going to rewrite our controller. We're still going to have methods for reading, adding, updating, and deleting, but all those methods are just going to be an API, a JSON API. So we'll have to kind of refactor our controller. And then in the client end, we've got 3 layers. We've got our HTML view, and because this is a single page application, we actually only need 1 HTML page. We'll need an Angular component like we created last week, and that component controls what happens in the view. It sends the data, it receives data from the forms in the view, and it also pushes data back out. So we worked with this last week. If I open up the project from last week, I'll actually keep them both open. So last week, we used the Angular CLI, the command line interface, to scaffold an app. And then we created a component that's written in TypeScript. And we kind of defined a structure of a project. We mocked up some data. And then we could interact with the UI inside of our component. and the component came along with its own HTML file. So we're going to use these again. We're going to use an HTML page. We're going to use these Angular directives in our HTML. We're going to use the Angular component to manipulate the UI. But then we're going to add a layer that we don't have. We're going to add an Angular service layer. If you look at this structure, what do you suppose, and you can guess, what do you think the Angular service layer is going to do? So we've worked with all 5 of these layers before, except this one that I've highlighted. So what do you suppose the role of that service layer is going to be? So we've got database models and an API on the server. On the client, we've got an HTML view. We've got a component to connect it, to control it. Yeah, exactly, Justin. Or Maggie, you got it. So the service, this is going to be the interface, the bridge that lets the component is not, our Angular component, it doesn't call the server API directly. The services layer is going to serve as that bridge between the server app we've written in Node and the client app we've written in Angular. So it's going to make the calls to certain API methods, fetch the JSON, and give the data back to the component. Just to show you what this will look like when we're finished next week. Let's go here. I'll show you from single page app that we did. Let's see, last year. So here was last year's class. So I'll just give you a kind of a view so you can see where we're going. So I actually created a server folder, and my models and controllers are in here. And when we look at the controller, so we did kind of like a food market last year. So you can see all of the methods like get all the foods or post. Instead of rendering views, they simply return JSON. They might return JSON, data in JSON format, and they also can return HTTP status codes. So very similar to the APIs that we scaffolded in Visual Studio, but we're going to create these ourselves. So we've got methods for delete and a put method for update. So we'll need 4 methods in our controller. So there's our server. And on the client end, we'll build a client folder. We put the Angular app in here. And we can look at this service layer. So we created a food service in TypeScript. And this is, as Justin and Maggie said, that the service is the interface, it's the bridge between the Angular client app and the Node server app. So we're going to build a service similar to this. So our service calls the different methods in our API. So if we want to add, we'll do a post method at our controller endpoint, and we'll pass in a JSON object with the new record. If we want to delete, we'll pass in an ID. We'll call the delete method at the same URL. So the component will pass the data to the service, and the service will call the API, is how this structure is going to work. So it does mean to do this, we're going to have to write more code, a fair bit more code, and it's going to add some complexity, but it gives us the ability to do all of this on a single page. It also means we actually need to run 2 applications simultaneously. because our API runs on port 3000 and our Angular client app will run by default on port 4200. So we'll actually need to use two different terminal windows so we can launch and run both servers at the same time. Okay. So as I said, we have a fair bit to do. We're not going to do it all in one class. I've done it all in one class before and it's really rushed. I'd rather we take it kind of a bit at a time. Okay, so this is sort of the high level overview of what we want to build. Does anybody have questions about this before we start the implementation? We're going to create a completely new server app and a completely new client app. And then we're going to copy some of the pieces from the server app that we already have, like our models, for example, we can just reuse our database configuration. So we'll copy some of those files. Okay, so let's get started. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to open a command window and I'm going to go into my node folder. Yeah, Hung, import. Well, in Angular, we use import. We would use require in Node. Right? If we want to add a library, we use require in Node, but we use import in Angular. So here we're adding libraries in Node, right? We're using require. Whereas in Angular, we use import. So slightly different syntax, but they do the same thing. Does that help? Okay. So I'm going to open up a command prompt and go to my node folder where all my projects are. And the first thing we'll do is use the Express generator to build the server app, build the node app. Pardon me. So I'm going to go into my folder, my root node folder. If I do a dir command, you'll see here's all the projects. And so here's our project tracker that we've been working on. That's our Node and Express app. And here was our Angular app we built last week. So I'm going to create a new project in this folder, first of all, using the Express generator. So I'll run the command express. I'll call this project SPA, so for single page application. And I'm just going to check. I'm just going to, haven't used the generator for a couple months now. I want to make sure, well, actually, I guess the view engine doesn't really matter. I don't even need the view engine because we can just leave it to the default because we're not going to use the views that come with Express anyway. We're going to use our Angular client app for the front end. So we can just run express. I'll put it in the chat. Project-SPA. So it's going to create our views. We can ignore this warning. So it gave us views in Jade, which we don't really care. And then it wants us to change directories to go into the project SPA and run npm install. So be sure you run these two commands as well. cd project SPA. an npm I or npm install. So just follow the code prompts. I know we haven't done this for a little bit. I'll put them in the chat. So we're going to change directories, go into project SPA, and then run npm install. And that will download all the dependencies into node modules. Okay, Aditya, if you're getting Express is not recognized, you might need to reinstall the Express generator. So you'd need npm I express generator -g. So try that command I've just put in the chat. Try reinstalling the generator. It tells me there's a new version of npm available. I'm not going to worry about that for right now. It also suggests I run npm audit fix with ---- force. If you get that warning, you can ignore it if you want. I'll try that command. I won't spend too much time updating this stuff, but if it makes some errors go away, I'll do it. Okay, this just has to do with the Jade UI, which we don't really care about, so I'm not going to worry about it. So let's open up this project now in our code editor. So I'll open it in a new window. I think I'm going to keep our original project tracker open. It's going to make it easy to copy some of the files. Okay, thanks, Aditya, that's good. So I don't really need the Angular app open anymore. Yeah, it should still work. Should be okay, Justin. So I'm going to open up my new project here. Go into my node folder. I probably have to hit refresh before I can see it. And here's our, I didn't show up. Okay, here's my project SPA, my single page app. So we'll open it up. So this project, like any other Express generator project, it should run right away. So if I just run the nodemon command, it should give us the Express, it should open up a page that'll say, welcome to Express. So I'll run it with nodemon. Excuse me. And I should be able to go to localhost 3000. And we get our typical welcome to Express page. So these views are not using handlebars. If we look, it's actually using a different template engine that's kind of neat. It's called Jade. There's not actually any angled brackets in it at all, which is sort of neat. But we're not going to wind up using these views anyway, so we don't really care about them. So we want to set up the server app as an API. So I want to make some changes here. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new folder, new directory at the top called server. That's step one. Because we're going to split this project up into the Node server on the back end, the Angular client app on the front end. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to rename this roots folder to controllers, because generator gives us this name, which I don't like personally. So I'm going to right click it. I'm going to choose refactor and rename. And I'm going to rename it to controllers. And if I leave these checked, then the paths in app.js will also be updated from roots to controllers. So then I just click refactor. I'll leave the window up for a minute, and that will rename the folder as well as any references or paths anywhere in the application. Okay, so in VS Code, you'll have to change those. You may have to do that manually. So I'm going to rename it to controllers. And then I want to move the controllers directory. I'm going to move that inside. I'm going to drag it into the server folder. And again, in WebStorm, it says search for references. So that will also, again, modify any paths. So when I open up my app.js, so if you're using VS Code, you'll need to change these two lines because they're going to have the word roots and it's not going to be prefixed with the word server. So that's one thing we'll do. I also want, let's see, we'll probably be able to we can get rid of the public folder and the views folder. We don't need them because our server app is just an API. So I'm going to right click views. I can delete it. I can right click and delete public. Okay, maybe I can't do it well. I can't do it because my web app is open. So I'm going to stop my server. I think I need to close this tab. And then I actually think I can delete public now, which I can. Probably don't need these things, but I'll just leave them here. And now inside the server, I want to create a models folder. So we'll create a new directory called models. Now remember, this is a new application. Our server needs to talk to the database, so we're going to need to install Mongoose. So in our terminal, we want to install Mongoose. npm I Mongoose. So our server API can connect and talk to MongoDB. So let's run that. And now I'm just going to copy the project model that we have in our original application. We'll just copy it in here. So you can just copy the whole file, or I'm just going to go into my original project, open up project.js, and I'm just going to copy what's here. We want this same schema. So you can copy the file itself in your Finder or Windows Explorer, or you can just recreate it. So I'm just going to copy the file, come back to my new project, and I'm going to make a new JavaScript file, same name as before, project. And again, the model names are singular. So we'll call it project.js. And I'll just paste in the exact same code. link to Mongoose, define the project schema, and export it so it's public, so our controller can use it. Also suggesting we use const, which I will. No big deal. So inside the server folder, we've got controllers and models, and we replicated or just copied over the project model that we had originally. We also need to now set up our database connection. So we'll need our configuration file. And then we'll need the code in app.js that connects to the database. So we can replicate this stuff. So I'm going to make a config folder in the root. I'll make a new directory called config. And again, I'm going to copy over from our original project. I'm going to copy the globals file. I don't really need the GitHub login, so I'll remove that part, but I'll just copy the contents and then we can get rid of the GitHub client credentials. So I'm going to go and recreate my globals.js file. Again, or you could just copy it over if that's easier. I guess that would work too. If I go to my node folder, I can do it this way. Go to my project tracker. I'll just copy the globals file from our original project tracker. I'll copy it into the config folder of the new project. And then I can take out the GitHub. We don't need the GitHub section. All we need here is the database for this app. There's not going to be any authentication on our app. It's just going to be public. Okay, so we've copied our project model. We've copied the config folder with the globals file. And these things are inside our controllers and models. They're inside the server directory. I'm going to keep the config directory outside of the server because both the Angular app and the server API are going to use the globals folder. I now want to copy the code from our original application from app.js. I want to copy the code that connects to our MongoDB. So go back to our old project. We'll open up app.js. And we'll scroll down to our section that connects to the database. It's right here. So for me, it starts on line 82. It's after all our routing. I'm just going to copy that. So in app.js, maybe down here before the 404 handling, we'll add in our connection. So if we run the app right now, we can't load it in the browser, but we should see at least whether we can connect to the database or not. So I'll just use nodemon for a minute. Okay. Oh, we need to connect our config. We added the configuration, but then we tried to use it here. Where did we do it? Ah. So we're going to link to our globals file first. Then we can read the database connection string from that file. I think I missed that line. Right now it says I'm connected. So above that section with our database, we need this line. So now our backend is running. We're missing one more element from our backend to do for our project tracker. Anybody have an idea what else we need to add to the server end of things? Got a model. We've got our connection string. We've installed Mongoose. And when our app starts, we're connecting to the database. So what's the other piece that we are missing? Hung, we are missing the views, but those are going to be on the client end. So yeah, we're missing the total views. We're still missing one thing from the server end. So what do we not have? We've got the database. We've got a model that's using Mongoose. So there's one more thing we need for our server API. What's missing? Right. Yeah, we're missing the controller. So we need a projects controller and a detail. Yeah, the routing is going to be part of it. So it's the routing and the controller. So in our controllers folder, we're not going to copy the old controller. We're going to create a new one. So let's make projects.js inside of the controllers folder. So we're going to make the controller that Maggie is pointing out, and Aditya is also pointing out we're going to need to add the routing for it inside of app.js. So create it as projects.js, plural. And then we can add that routing right now. So in app.js, we're going to point it to our project. And then down below, we want to do the routing. So any URLs that start with the path /projects are mapped to this controller. So we'll come down here and we'll say app.use project will be handled by our project controller. I don't like the word router, so I'm going to leave it out. So now we can go to our controller. First, we'll add Express, because Express does the routing. So we're going to create a router in here. So exactly the same two lines that appeared in our control, in all our other controllers. We look at the index controller, other than they used var because it's old, or the user's controller, same two lines. First, so let's do a get at /projects. So router.get. And now we just do our usual Express callback, request, response, next. For the moment, let's see, what will we do? We'll just send back some dummy data. We'll just create a little JSON object, and we're just going to return the JSON. And we'll return a 200 response. And now, just like our other controllers, we need to make it public, so we're going to export it. Oops. So a really simple controller, we're just going to pass back, for the moment, just a mock JSON object with a 200 response. So now our controller is an API, right? We're not loading a view. We're just sending back JSON. So now we could actually try this in the browser. Our app is running, connected to the database. So now if I call localhost 3000/projects, I get a JSON object back. And if we check the network traffic, that wasn't wrong console. So under in the network, right, there's our 200 response that we're returning. Anybody, any questions so far? When you go to localhost 3000/projects, you should get this little JSON object. If you are, that's great. Now we don't really want to return this object. What should we return instead at this URL, right? At localhost 3000 slash. So here's the method. The first two lines and the last line I'm not going to copy because I assume everybody knows these by now. So what do we want to see instead at this URL? If we make an API call here, a GET request at /projects, instead of seeing this, what should we actually be sending? Just going to comment that out. Where does the project data live right now? We have some project data already. Where is it? Right, it's in MongoDB. That's right, Hung. So if we want to fetch the projects from MongoDB instead, we need to do a couple of things in our controller. What do we need to do? Hung is suggesting we'll need Mongoose. I would agree. Refs to get data from MongoDB. So yes, we need Mongoose. I think we need Mongoose. We need one other reference. What other item does the controller need to talk to that sits between the controller and the database? Or think of the architecture, the pattern for our app. We've got MongoDB with our data, our documents. We've got our API controller. What sits in between them to do all the database calls and pass the data back and forth? If we were doing authentication, yes, we could need Passport. We're not actually doing any authentication right now. Which layer sits between the database and your control and a controller? Thank you, Nick. Yes, the model sits in between. Right, where are we here? So we've got MongoDB. We've got MongoDB back here. We've got a controller. We need the model. Just like we did originally, right? We needed our project model in our controller. We need the project model here too. Const project. So now we can perform create, read, update, and delete operations using the project model. So now we're going to use Mongoose model to select all projects from MongoDB. So we call project.find with no parameters. We're not filtering the list. We want all the project documents. And when we call find, we get back one of two things. We get an error or a list of projects. So now we just need a simple if statement. If we get an error, we'll return an error message. Otherwise, we'll return all the project data in JSON format along with the 200 OK response. So if we get an error, we'll return. We're going to return the error message in JSON format, plus we'll chain on a status. Anybody remember from last semester what a 400 status means? That HTTP status code? Good guess, Justin. That would be 404. Yes, it is an error, but it has a specific meaning. What does 400 mean? Thank you, Maria. In this case, 400 means bad request. So you've asked for data that we can't get. Otherwise, we'll move our OK in here. So we're going to use our model and Mongoose to try and fetch the data. We're going to get either an error or we'll get data back. If we have an error, we'll pass that error in JSON with a 400 code. Otherwise, we'll pass the data. I'm not actually sure we need the Mongoose reference directly. We may be able to take it out because we're linking to the project model, and the project model uses Mongoose. So I'm going to try it both ways, and then we'll take a break in a minute. So if we go back to the browser and refresh, I'm hoping we should see a list of all the projects in our MongoDB in JSON format. Which we do. Cool. Right, here's our raw data. And I use this little JSON extension. You can even use a tool like Postman. You don't have to do it in your browser. You could make a GET request in Postman at localhost 3000/projects. And again, if we check our inspector, and our network, we see, well, in this case, I'm just refreshing it, so it's not modified. Because I hit refresh, I do it again, right? Not modified. That's okay. So there's our first API method. So we've got no views at all. Okay, it is 12:56, so it's a good time for us to take a pause. I'm going to upload all of this to GitHub. I'm going to make a new repository for it on GitHub. So I'll go ahead and do that now. And then when we come back, we want to start to build the Angular app that can call our API, fetch the list of projects, and then render them with an ng for loop in Angular. And if we can get that done, then we can start building a form to also add a project. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new repo. I'm going to stop the recording, and I will push this up to GitHub in just a second.